The Lives of Lucian, Freud, Youth, William Fever. Prologue. Always wanted never to have anything known about me. There was, as usual, several pictures on the go. The main one, on an easel directly under the skylight, was so far little more than eyes and a chin. Floorboards edging in, indication in charcoal of a body on bed, a muzzle and a smudge where Pluto the Viper would lie, and a patch of white at the foot of the bed where a woman was to have stood. She had become intrusive, the painter had decided. A lesser distraction was needed. Quote, possibly something under the bed, end quote, he said. Well, what was to become a sunny morning, 8 legs preoccupied Lucian Freud in daylight hours. Others were worked on through evening sessions and into the night. Rose, one of his daughters, and her husband Mark were sitting for a double portrait. Their heads distinct but as yet unrelated. The gap between them just beginning to be realized. Quote, I have already put some air in here, end quote, was the comment. Another daughter, Ib, had been sitting with a book for a second daytime painting. The relationship of head to Proust had worked out well, but more breathing space was needed, and so the canvas had been extended. Proceeding as he did by accretion, form by form, Freud often found enlargement necessary. That way, ideas grow. The seams that zigzagged down all 4 sides of Ib reading would soon be painted over, leaving scars visible only in the raking light. Freud's working methods were demanding while unassuming throughout, presuming nothing save the presence of whoever or whatever he had felt like painting. He would go ahead with little or no preconception beyond the glimmerings of potential. Early on, as a beginner, there had been a buzz, the magic almost of making imagined things substantial, making them convincing somehow. Quote, in that way, once I got going, they led me on. I like to have nothing there so that I felt there came from nowhere, end quote. Later, he came to depend on engaging with what he actually saw, intuition reminding him, by the way, that a sitter's afterward appearance was to do with what's inside his head. No other painter in modern times has more straightforwardly made so much of the particular. He used to mock me for being obliged. He said, as an art critic, to maintain eternal vigilance, which of course was what in practice he demanded of himself. His was an intent alertness sustained hour by hour, week in, week out. Painting had to be unremitting, never, in his words, indulgent to the subject matter. I'm so conscious that that is a recipe for bad art. He talked about perseverance as an instinct. Ruthlessness too, he assumed. But what went without saying, quote, I always thought that the artist's life was the hardest life of all, end quote. Painting absorbs whatever affects the painter, every consideration, emotional or otherwise. Freud believed stretches a painting's potential. Quote, I don't think there is any kind of feeling you have to leave out. End quote. If the feeling wasn't there, then ultimately the painting failed. Yet the feeling in a painting was necessarily filtered, distanced, objectified. He stressed the need to avoid false feeling or gratuitous fervor. Quote, I don't want them to be sensational, but I want them to reveal some of the results of my concentration. End quote. His concentration over the years yielded painting, drawings, and etchings that fixed insistently on what we are, whoever we are, on the motif, whatever it may be, getting a hold on the ingrained uncertainties that spice a life. Freud liked unpredictability, particularly at the outside. Quote, I try and vary the way I start. What I mean is, sometimes I put down a lot of paint, but sometimes, say, on a single figure. I start in a different place. Often, I have started round the stomach and the different parts. It's to do with my horror of a method, which may come to my having had such a rigorous method at the very beginning. That method conspicuously exhaustive, culminated in Girl with Roses, 1947 to 1948, considered by Freud his first real picture, and certainly one of the first to advance on a sizable scale the notion of close attention at the essence of a relationship. The girl's stare is subjected to that of the painter. She looks towards a window shone reflected in her eyes. Such detail may prompt metaphysical analogy, windows into the sitter's soul, but it represents more the desire of an exacting young painter to make the image alert. The sitter was Kitty Garman, a daughter of Jacob Epstein, whose bust of her, done 3 years previously, represented her as a sort of Naid with a streaming head of hair. Epstein talked of a trembling eagerness of life passing through such portrait sculpture. Quote, head, shoulders, body, and hands like music. End quote. His future son-in-law, quote, the spy Lucian Freud, as he was to refer to him after the divorce, saw Kitty plain, wide eyes, breast shoulders, seated as rigidly as a playing card queen. He had painted her a couple of times before, initially young and artless in a businessman's jacket, and then holding a tabby kitten as though offering a decanter. The relaxed limpness of the paws indicating a kindly grip on the neck of his namesake attribute. Girl with Roses exemplifies weariness. It harks back to 100 details from picture in the National Gallery, a selection made by the gallery's director Kenneth Clark and published in 1938, in which, page after page, the black and white photo graver reproductions parade stimulating qualities. The poise of Holbein's Christina of Denmark, the salon aplomb of Ingrid's Madame Mostasia, one of Freud's favorite paintings and Clark's most astute acquisition for the National Gallery in his time there. Living through the detail that in sudden alacrity most vividly compares with a girl with roses is the close-up of the tabby cat clinging to the chair back in Hugo's The Graham Children, eyes enormous, thorny claws bared. Thanks to Clark, who fixed it for him, Freud used to have his paintings photographed by Mrs. Wilson in the National Gallery photographic department, and as Girl with Roses approached completion, he began wondering how it would look in black and white. I remember being so excited while I did the green straps on the jersey. I put black dots on the green straps because I thought if I put them in, they would come up, like doing etching, knowing it wouldn't show on the plate, but it will come out in the paint. This papering showed up well in the photograph, reproduced opposite the tonal fog of a barmaid picture by Ruskin Spear, a blustery third-generation secret. In a 1951 Pelican book, Contemporary British Art, by Herbert Read, who in a later edition was to dub Freud the English existentialism and replace the spare with a bar. The painting looked redolently distinctive to the Greek poet Nanos Valarotis, writing in the early 1950s. Kitty here was petrified in a corner, at bay like a frightened animal. In keeping with the things that are not made up, that Freud admired in ancient Egyptian art, Girl with Roses exalts appearance. Here, individual fingernails and individual hairs, some with split ends, living relics as fully realized as the golden tricesis of a door. I did the hair architecturally and moved it and watched it, and then I did that thing, working slowly, that I have often done, which is to change life to suit art. Delight graces the painting, molding the velvet skirt, glossing the lips, adding penumbra to the frieze of loose hairs around the head, striking down the arm of the chair and saluting its torn canework. This chair from a junk shop in a former chapel in the Harrow Road near Delamere Terrace in Paddington, where since 1943 Freud had rented a flat, was peculiarly uncomfortable. Quote, if you land back the wrong way, you snagged a nail. It is useful in the picture. Equally useful is the congruity of forms, as calculated as any pin-up pose. Flecked curls and curvy straps, teeth and fingernails so alike, the nostril flare of the chair back, the petal-shaped birthmark on the hand, the rose held up like a child's buttercup, thrust against the chain, to test a taste for butter is halfway to being an emblem, poetic rather than symbolic. The Rose of Venus, it recalls the phrase of Rilke, the rose of unlooking, which Freud had seen in the September 1947 number of Poetry London. It and the other rose on her lap, nuzzling her left hand, are steadily inanimate. Quote, I suppose they are portraits, end quote, Freud said, by which he meant that they are specific, having been done from life. They are not, let's have a rose. They are actual ones. Those cheap bunches you got where most of them died but one or two survived. You don't see them now. Costermongers of flowers, yellow and red ones, wired to keep them throttled. Very often they couldn't get enough water, so they just had asthma. Over time, grow with roses and eclipses, the most famous seated figure in British art of the period, a figure in Haunton stone, even more complacent than Ingres' statuesque Mem Montessier. Henry Moore's Northampton Madonna, unveiled in 1944 in the Church of St. Matthew, Northampton, by Kenneth Clark, who remarked as he did so that it may worry some simple people. Moore, talking of austerity and nobility and some touch of grandeur, had struck his Madonna's head a little in the interests of monumentality. Freud did the opposite. For him, there was the urge to accentuate, had to achieve the looming look of a face that, as the expression goes, is all eyes, knowing by heart, as he did, swaths of poetry of all kinds. There were phrases that bed into the memory and came to mind as he worked. Muttered, murmured, behind the girl with roses, the lines he loved, Shakespeare's pox on the rhetoric of false compare. My mistress' eyes are nothing like the sun. Carol is far more right than her lips right. If snow be white, why then her breasts are dumb. If hairs be wears, black wears grow on her head. I have seen roses damasked, red and white, but no such roses see I in her cheeks. The fact of your life being your subject matter doesn't in any way change the nature of art or artistic enterprise, and therefore it seems absolutely obvious, as well as convenient, to use as subject what you are thinking and looking at all the time, the way your life goes.